Today's economic news, it resulted in a temper tantrum from Senator Schumer. Chuck Schumer went nuts on the Senate floor because of this economic data. That tells me that it is good news for Trump. We had some big economic news this morning as the final reports for the second quarter's gross domestic product were released. And, well, it's funny, you'll get the news delivered to you in two very different ways depending on what network you're watching. But know this, it's very good news. Things are going very well. And once again, the experts were wrong. But first, let's share the news here. And the way it was delivered, on the top of the screen, you'll see Fox Business Channel. Is this our buddy Mays that put this together? Yeah, it is. Mays is so good. Subscribe to him on X. He does great videos. On the top, it's the way Fox Business delivered the news. And then on the bottom is the way CNN delivered the news. Understand, it's the exact same news. It's the exact same numbers. It's the exact same data. But believe it or not, on those two networks, they had very different reactions.
GDP, this is the first read of the second quarter coming in at 3%. That is better than expected.
We have an economy growing at, what do you say, 3%? We have inflation at 2%. That's the best of both worlds.
Yes, it did rebound to an annualized rate of 3% during the second quarter. Even though headline GDP rebound, this economy has actually started to lose some momentum.
Wait a second. So we just went from a negative 1% in the first quarter as a reaction still from the Biden economic policies to a 3%. That's like a 4.5% increase in just 3 months. And CNN's analysis is
GDP, this is the first read.
Has some problems. Okay. Listen, I'm not going to tell you what to think. You know what the economic world is looking like in your life and with your job and with your business. And I guess you can take your worldview and you can apply it to this new data, and you can decide for yourself whether the economy is on the rebound and getting stronger and bigger or not. Just like Fox Business will tell you one thing and CNN will tell you the other. But I'll say this, today's economic news, it resulted in a temper tantrum from Senator Schumer. Chuck Schumer went nuts on the Senate floor because of this economic data. That tells me that it is good news for Trump. It is good news for America, because if the economy is doing well, that makes Democrats angry. Bear that in mind here. They're not rooting for success right now. All right, so let's set CNN and Fox aside for a minute. Let's check out how the business channel CNBC is looking at it. First, as usual, the experts were wrong. On the left is your headline from July 8th, CNBC. Expect a slowdown in GDP growth, so 3 rate cuts likely, says Citi's Rob Rowe. Here's this morning's headline on CNBC. U.S. economy grew at a 3% rate in quarter two, better than expected pace, even as Trump's tariffs hit. I love the even as Trump's tariffs hit. Why didn't the headline writer write just as or because Trump tariffs hit? Or, it's like, the tariffs have hit, but the GDP still went up. Maybe the GDP went up because we started growing our economy more here domestically instead of relying on foreign countries for our gross product. So that's CNBC once again. And I love the better than expected. Maybe you should get better people to make the expectations. Do you ever stop and think, does anyone at CNBC ever say, hey guys, could we get a different team in here that isn't always wrong? And they're always wrong in the same direction. Then on video at CNBC, Rick Santelli, a little bit more enthusiastic about the numbers we're looking at right now.
Up 3%, better than expected. That would be the highest level since the third quarter of 24, when it was up 3.1%. On the consumption side, up 1.4, very close to estimates. Up 1.4 would be the best since the last quarter of 24. Up 3%.
Now, that's very good. And by the way, he was comparing it to the third and fourth quarter of 24, which had a couple of different factors. First of all, as you know, the Democrats who were in charge decided in the Senate and in the White House and Biden, they decided to make changes and implement policies specifically to goose up the economy right before the election that were contrary to what he had done for the first 3 years. They do that all the time, number one. And number two, the hope of Trump's win in November actually already had an early effect on the economy. But more importantly, let's compare how Rick Santelli of CNBC just announced the GDP numbers in the second quarter of 2025 to an exact same comparable announcement to the Biden era. Now, it would be easy and frankly unfair for me to say, let's look at the second quarter of 2021, because that was the first year of Biden's presidency. So that is a direct apples to apples comparison, right? But that wouldn't be fair because we were still in the midst of the lockdown. We were still dealing with COVID-19. People were still out of work. So we're gonna extend Joe Biden some grace here. We are instead going to compare to Rick Santelli's announcement on the same network. We're going to do it for 2022. So this is 3 years ago today. This is the second quarter of Joe Biden's second year in office. So we're out of the pandemic. And by the way, Joe Biden has already passed his American Recovery Act or whatever it was called. So he's already been able to put in place his policies and his legislation, his signature piece of legislation to be able to revitalize the economy coming out of the pandemic. So, Mr. Santelli, how's the GDP under Joe Biden?
GDP, first look, first quarter, is a nasty minus 1.4. Minus 1.4. We haven't had a minus sign since that nasty second quarter, COVID-related in 2020.
Nasty. And nasty. And what was the growth of the GDP? We didn't have growth. It was negative growth. I love the term negative growth, by the way. Kevin Hassett, he is the chief economic advisor to President Trump. He met the media today after this announcement. Here's his assessment.
Yeah, it's really one of the best GDP announcements or releases that you could imagine, because there's blockbuster growth way above expectation. And there's also a real almost collapse in inflation. It went down by about 1.5% all the way down to 2.1%, which is the Fed's target. And so to have high growth with low inflation and also high income growth, personal income growth was 3%. That's just like about a sweet spot for a GDP release. And I will add that all of this happened while 127 billion in tariffs was raised, which is clearly not harming the American consumer. And we've been downsizing government in order to be more fiscally responsible. 70,000 federal jobs have been reduced, and 5%. There was a 5% reduction in federal government spending while all this was going on.
Yeah, I hope you took all that in, because oftentimes you'll hear economists say that the way to grow the economy is to increase government spending. So they can Democrats always take that approach. We got to fix this economy, and that's why we need to go into debt by spending more of your money that we don't actually have. So we're really borrowing money from the future, and that's going to create a larger economy. But what that does is increase inflation because it's fake, it's not real, and it's also created by and funded by the government. So ultimately, it grows the government, which ends up in the long run harming all of us because of the debt we're incurring. Instead, we reduce the size of government, we reduce the payroll of the government, we streamlined much of what the government was doing. This was all from the private sector. Oftentimes you would see jobs numbers under Joe Biden and they looked really kind of good. Oh gosh, added 250,000 jobs this quarter. Or this month. That's huge. But then when you look at it, like 50,000 of the jobs came from the private sector and the rest all came from government. It's easy to grow jobs numbers when it's the government that's doing all of the hiring. So it really is incredibly strong, considering the fact that inflation was only 2%. But that's a guy who works for the president. See, he's paid to try to spin this and make it look as rosy as possible. What about this guy, the chief political opponent of President Trump in Washington, D.C.? He's the minority leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, a Democrat. You see, he's rooting for the economy to tank. See, if things are bad for us economically, that's good news for Chuck Schumer. So what was his mood like when these numbers were released?
And while the Trump administration will try to wave rosy headlines about the Q2 number, today's GDP number is in fact a mirage because some ominous numbers lurk under the hood. Business investment plunged in the second quarter by 3.1%. The fact that business investment plunged so starkly is very troubling. It shows that already businesses are worried about growing their operations, worried about hiring more workers, worried about trading with their international partners, and worried in general about the future. And this number is another data point in a larger pattern. Donald Trump's tariffs are weighing down the U.S. economy, spiking costs for small businesses and families alike. And if Donald Trump keeps up the chaos, the dangers for the economy will continue to get worse.
Is he done? Is it done? I'm so sorry. I apologize. Chuck Schumer just has that effect on me. He's quite an orator, isn't he? What a delivery. Makes you miss Cory Booker. There you go. It's all a mirage, guys. The tariffs are weighing down the economy. So what you're telling me is if it weren't for the tariffs, we would have had, what, 5% GDP? 6% GDP? That's all he's got. The tariffs are weighing down the economy. We had 3% GDP with the tariffs, and we raised $100 billion in the federal treasury because of the tariffs. Also, those tariffs led to a monumental trade agreement with the European Union where we pretty much got everything we wanted, but the tariffs are weighing down our economy. Because why shouldn't you trust a guy who has actually never had a private sector job in his life? He has never hired anybody for a private sector job. He has never had to make a private sector payroll. In fact, I think every paycheck Chuck Schumer has made since he was in his early 20s has been a government paycheck of one kind or another. So, of course, he's an expert on the economy. But the fact that Chuck Schumer addressed these numbers like he was a mortician tells you that this is actually very good news. Meanwhile, Amy Klobuchar, part of leadership for the Democrats, and like I said, is running for president. She's decided that she's going to tell you a fairy tale to tell you how bad the economy is. Just understand something. The numbers are not working for them. The data is not working for them. Whether it's the GDP, whether it's inflation, whether it's the jobs numbers, none of the actual raw data works. How about the stock market? Nope, they can't point at that either. So what have they got? Well, they've got fiction. And here's Amy Klobuchar with some really creative writing.
I was up in Grand Marais, Minnesota, and saw someone walk out of a grocery store, just happened to be walking in, saw her look at her receipt. She was looking down and she's just, no. I was up.
Who believes that? Who believes Amy Klobuchar actually went to a grocery store? Who believes that somebody was walking out looking at their receipt saying, no. By the way, she could have been looking at her receipt, shaking her head, saying, no, I forgot the hamburger. Oh, damn it. I always forget to pick up hamburger. How do you know she wasn't looking at her receipt saying, no, why did the Democrats make our sales tax so high in this state? Oh, no, why did Tim Walz raise our sales tax? No, why are Tim Walz's policies making things expensive in Minnesota? I'm actually from Michigan. It's even worse there. No. How do we know this wasn't a Texan who was visiting friends in Minnesota and was looking at the receipt saying, no, why are things so expensive in this Democrat-run state? Now, again, I'm giving you various interpretations of what the fictional no, looking at your receipt may have meant. But I maintain that this right here never happened.
I was up in Grand Marais, Minnesota, and saw someone walk out of a grocery store, just happened to be walking in, saw her look at her receipt. She was looking down and she's just, no.
By the way, real fast, and I won't ask you again, but put it in our live chat or put it in the comments section. But who goes to a grocery store where they hand out receipts, or the little machine spits out receipts that would be held like this? Right? Aren't receipts like this? Like they're about this wide and they're usually long. So you'd be holding it, like that, or you'd be holding it with one hand looking at it. But she specifically is holding this. Is she looking at it horizontally? She's looking at the receipt like it's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. What grocery store is this exactly? It doesn't exist. Look at the receipt. Look at how she's holding the receipt. No grocery store gives a receipt this wide. It never happened. All right. So now what are Democrats going to do? So the data doesn't work for them, right? GDP data doesn't work for them. The unemployment numbers don't work for them. The inflation numbers aren't working for them. The tariff numbers aren't working for them. The actual net results of the tariffs, which gives us trade deals, aren't working for them. The Wall Street, the numbers on Wall Street and the stock market ain't working for them. The actual reduction of our data. Did you know that in June, the federal government showed a surplus for the first time in a decade? So that ain't working for them. Amy Klobuchar coming up with a short story that she wrote herself before heading out to that press conference. That ain't working for them. So what else have they got? Well, we'll swing over to CNN with Wolf Blitzer. He's got the governor of Colorado on, Jared Polis. Now, Jared Polis, I think, is going to run for president because, look at him. That's a stunning figure. Who doesn't want to be led by that guy? So what has he got?
Of all these tariffs.
Well, first of all, it's ridiculous. Europe, our closest ally, the tariff has historically been between 1% and 3%. Trump has hiked it to 15%. That's a net 12, 13% price increase for American consumers on everything that comes from Europe. India potentially could be even worse for America if it stays anywhere near that 25%, because this is really important for Americans buying products. It also discourages investment in the United States, because when you're making things here for export, there's always a reciprocal tariff. The other country puts one on us. And so a lot of manufacturing is going to move overseas. I've already heard from companies here saying, we're not going to build a factory in Colorado. We're going to build it overseas because we can't pay the tariffs on all the parts and materials that we need to make our product.
I know, Governor, you issued an executive order earlier this month to try to mitigate the effects of these tariffs, but President Trump has been able to strike trade agreements with some U.S. allies, including a framework with the European Union just the other day. Are you willing to give Trump credit for that?
Well, no, because it went from 2% to 15%. If he gets it down to zero, I would be happy to give him credit, Wolf. That's the goal of trade negotiations. And if this is some sort of bluff with India, he wants them to stop selling to Russia, bring down their barriers, and he goes to zero, I'll say he was a great negotiator and got a good deal. Right now, 25%, 15%, ripping off the American people, bad deals, hurts the economy.
I just want to jump in here real fast because we're talking about the economy and they're throwing a lot of things. And a lot of people believe that, by the way, that employing a 50% tariff on the European Union is ripping off the American people. Now, let me be clear here real quickly. Okay. If BMW or Mercedes, what do you buy from Europe right now? Seriously, if you look at the actual numbers about the big ticket stuff, like the biggest ticket stuff coming out of Europe that Americans are buying. We're talking about BMWs, Mercedes, Volkswagens, and you're talking some pharmaceuticals too, which thanks to this guy, we're all paying for through our taxes and the federal government in many respects. Okay, but sets pharmaceuticals aside for a second, which, by the way, I think pharmaceuticals were clear of any tariffs in the EU deal, so it doesn't even apply to pharmaceuticals. So let's just say that a BMW or a Mercedes or champagne and fancy cheese or what have you is going to be more expensive. It could be the truth, right? So if you're buying a Mercedes or a BMW, maybe you factor that in. You know, the dealer here is going to have a choice. They either eat the tariffs and cut into their profit margin, or they pass the tariffs on to the consumer. And the consumer who is already prepared to buy a BMW or a Mercedes, it's going to be a little bit more expensive for them to pay the tariff. And you're right, that's the government imposing a cost to the consumer that is only there because the government has imposed it. I get it. And you've got a Democrat making the case that the American people are getting screwed because the government is adding a cost to a product that they want to buy. Now, I could use a Democrat talking point, and I can say, well, those rich people are buying Beamers and Mercedes, so screw them. Let them pay more for their Porsche. Fine. They're rich already. And honestly, there's some validity to that. But frankly, I'm more fascinated by a Democrat finally deciding that he wants to draw the line on the government imposing an unnecessary cost on a product and passing it on to the American consumer. What about your state sales tax, Governor Polis? What about all the regulations that the state of Colorado puts on every industry that does business in their state? Every time you start up a business in Colorado, every single thing you have to do, whether it's payroll taxes, whether it's HR training, whether it's DEI training, whether it's a business license, if you do anything that impacts the environment, the various studies that you have to pay for, every single regulation and law that Democrats in Colorado, who have been in charge of that state for a couple decades now, that this governor signs into law, every single thing that they make you jump through, every hoop they make you jump through, you know, the posters you have to put up in your break room for your employees that remind them what the minimum wage is and what their rights as an employee is, all that stuff. You got to buy all that stuff. That all comes out of your bottom line. And what do you do with it? You pass it on to your customers, don't you? That's all okay. Oh, in fact, that's all noble. That's virtuous. That's good government protecting the people. What about corporate taxes? Governor Polis, do corporate taxes now. You don't like tariffs? Do corporate taxes, because they love raising taxes on corporations, don't they? Oh, the problem is the corporations are getting away with murder. We need to raise taxes on corporations. Excuse me. When a corporation has to pay higher taxes, how do they get that money? Where do they get the money from that? You think they're just cutting into their profits and paying their taxes? No. They pass it on to you. When corporations have to pay higher taxes, they get the money to pay those taxes by charging more for their product or for their service. Just like what the tariffs do to the Mercedes or the Beamer. But it is remarkable now to see a Democrat decide that this is outrageous. The American people are going to have to pay those tariffs. Literally every single tax and regulation these Democrats love and scream bloody murder when Republicans reduce them. Every single one of them increases costs for you. And they will never, ever, ever acknowledge that. But suddenly, because Trump has decided to use tariffs as a tool with our international trade partners who have been getting away with murder for decades, suddenly now they've found religion. So they've got nothing. I mean, honestly, I've been looking for a legitimate, fair, and logic, fact-based argument from the Democrats today to make the case for Trump's economic policies being harmful and a disaster. And I've shown you everything that I've got. And I don't know where else to go from there other than a couple of days ago, Jim Cramer on CNBC dropping an F-bomb. I've got that.
Our biggest problem is we have so much growth that the Fed won't cut.
What the fuck? Oh, Jesus Christ.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I take it right back.
Everybody,
I take it right back. That was bad.
It's okay. We're in the moment.
I take it right back.
It's just the way
I take it right back. That was bad.
It's I
cable
can't.
with a ticker, as
No,
Joe Kernan would say.
I take that back.
That's right.
Real people doing live TV.
No.
Jim, though, to your
I take
point,
it back.
Goldman today, the most notable change.
I think I'm out of here.
No, you're fine. You're absolutely
Goldman
fine.
today, the most
You
notable
want me to
change.
say one?
No,
Oh,
I just feel like enough with the rate cut
go
and
ahead.
the economy's booming.
Let Carl talk now.
Goldman today, most notable change since the June.
By the way, I mean, it is funny to see. He's such a buffoon, and to see him drop an F-bomb like that is funny in and of itself. But then the reaction. I work in radio every day. We're controlled by the FCC, or not controlled, but we have certain standards that we have to meet. And saying the F word, look up the George Carlin thing about the 7 dirty words. Trust me, it's one of the words. And many derivatives of the F word you're not allowed to say, and the FCC will come down on you, and you could get fined, and it's very bad for your employer. So I have to work within the confines of the FCC. That's why here when we're streaming, I'm not controlled by that. Sometimes, that word can get through. I tend to not say it. That's why I have that at my disposal. CNBC is not regulated by the FCC. I mean, they shouldn't say it. They maybe have standards that they don't want a middle of the day show to have a bunch of F words and profanity, but that's their own decision. They're not, but either way, it's like I've been told we have a thing in radio called a delay, which means if somebody slips, if you've got a guest that says it or a caller, if they say something that is objectionable and outside the confines of the FCC, we have what's called a dump button. You hit a button and the delay will sort of jump forward so that what was just said on the air will not make it out through the broadcast. It's called a dump button, which is used sometimes. Sometimes you have to employ it. But the one thing that you learn as a professional, like these guys who have been in the business for a long time, is if something slips, if something happens, the last thing you want to do is make a big deal out of it. The last thing you want to do is draw attention to it. If you have to use the delay, or if, God forbid, something slips through, just act like nothing happened and be a professional and move on. They just spent a minute in hysterics over what Jim Cramer said. And he didn't even say it all the way. But these are the most trusted professionals that we're all supposed to be listening to when it comes to our economic news. And that's why over at CNBC, boy, they sure were right predicting the GDP numbers today. Expect a slowdown in growth. Nope, it was 3%. They're just bad at what they do, but they keep getting rewarded. Look at Jim Cramer, for God's sake. Has he gotten anything right? Has he gotten anything fucking right? No. Except for that moment. That was the realest moment I've ever seen on CNBC of late. And it was glorious. We're on the golden age right now, everybody, and I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are.